Okay, so we're starting off this week with 2nd Nephi chapter 2. And this is going to be a heavy doctrine conversation, as the question that's presented for us in the manual is, what do we learn about agency from Lehi? And so 4 principles are called out, and then we'll reflect on a couple other things that we learned. But we want to first start off discussing the 4 principles from the manual.
He specifically lays out. So the first one says a knowledge of good and evil, and it takes us to the scripture, 2 Nephi 2:5, that says, and men are instructed sufficiently that they know good from evil. And if you look at the footnotes, it takes you to Moroni. Scripture in Moroni 7:16 that says, for behold, the Spirit of Christ is given to every man that he may know good from evil. So right there we learned that knowledge is the Spirit of Christ, that we all innately have within us, the light of Christ, or conscience, whatever you call it. We know good from evil from the beginning. We all kind of have that sense of what is right and what is wrong. That is given to every man, that we kind of have that within us already.
Yeah, I remember in Preach My Gospel, from dating back to the mission field, it said that the light of Christ is most relatable to your conscience.
Yeah, your Jiminy Cricket.
Your Jiminy Cricket. So the second principle is that there is a law given to mankind. And the reference here is, again, 2 Nephi chapter 2, verse 5, where it says, and the law is given unto men. But I feel like actually later on in this chapter, verse 13, kind of gives a little bit more light onto the importance of that principle and how important it is to the doctrine of agency of a law. And so we actually learn here what the world would be like without a law. So here Lehi teaches us, and if ye shall say there is no law, ye shall also say that there is no sin. And if ye shall say there is no sin, ye shall also say there is no righteousness. So without a law, there's no right and wrong. There's no sin, there's no righteousness. So that's the first thing that's laid out. And if there is no righteousness, there is no happiness. And if there is no righteousness nor happiness, there is no punishment or misery. So now we have the outcome of our decisions. So first, the law creates right and wrong. And then by choosing right or wrong, there's an outcome to both of those. And that's happiness and misery. Or righteousness and punishment. And so it's kind of cool, just a very logical sense of the law. And then goes forth to say, and if these things aren't there, then there's no God, there's no creation, we are not, there's basically no purpose to life. A law brings purpose to our life in the pursuit of becoming like God.
Yeah, and the next one goes kind of like right along with that. I had some similar thoughts as that, with the third one, opposing and enticing choices. Mm-hmm. So going back to verse 11, for it must needs be that there is an opposition in all things. If not so, righteousness could not be brought to pass, neither wickedness. And then it goes on and says, wherefore all things must need be a compound in one. So a compound is 2 things put together, right? And so you must have that opposition, the good and the bad, in order for things to be able to have that law. I guess the law kind of, they work together, you know, you have to have the opposition in all things. And if you keep reading, just like Peter said, it says, wherefore there would have been no purpose in the end of its creation if there was no opposite in all things. If there was not that right and that wrong, that law to choose, there would be no purpose in the entire plan of happiness. And so that's how they go, hand in hand together. And so we have to have those opposing choices to be able to choose what we want to do.
Yeah, I love the word enticing. That there is a power of light and darkness all around us that is working for our souls. Darkness is calling for us. Light is calling for us. And going back to the verse right before what Laura read, is that punishment which is affixed and happiness which is affixed. That by making a right choice and then having the happiness that comes, you're enticed to do good again. And the same thing comes when you break the law and you choose evil. There's a punishment affixed or misery affixed that entices you to maybe not want to do that again.
Mm-hmm. Well, it just reminds me of that light cleaveth unto light. So the more right choices you make, that enticing, you're more enticed to do good, rather than bad. So it's like kind of changing you in that aspect.
Very true. Then the last principle brought forth in the manual is the power to act, referencing verse 16, and I also added verse 27, which I feel teach this principle of acting, and the power given to all of us to act. We all have that. That's a gift to all, no matter what your social status, no matter what your background is, what your religion, your race, just we all have been given a power to act and to choose. So here in verse 16, wherefore the Lord gave unto man that he should act for himself, or she should act for herself. And verse 27, I just love how it kind of brings out this principle more fully. Actually, the verse right before it, we're free forever to act for themselves and not to be acted upon. And then verse 27, wherefore men are free according to the flesh, and all things are given them which are expedient unto man. And they are free to choose liberty and eternal life through the great mediator of all men, or to choose captivity and death according to the captivity and the power of the devil. And so this freedom is ours. We are all free. And like the verse before says, we're free forever. So we have the freedom to choose. Even when captivity and death and addiction comes in, we still have freedom to choose. And we can work to get more access to that freedom as those are being tried to be taken away from us. But the power to act is given by God to men and women upon this earth.
Yeah, and I love, Peter brought up this point before, that it's not something that is new. It talks a lot in here about Adam and Eve and how they acted and they were enticed by the fruit, and they had the choice to choose to partake of the fruit, and what happened because of that, and just how it's an eternal doctrine. I mean, we even know from before this life, that we had the power to choose. That agency was still there. But it is here because I have written here, like, if Adam and Eve had not acted, they would have stayed, it said they would have stayed in a state of innocence, having no joy, for they knew no misery, doing no good, for they knew no sin. There would be no progression. And we are here to progress. That's our whole point here, is to progress, to become like Christ, to become God's, to progress. And so that agency is how that's going to happen. And so it's that eternal doctrine, that eternal thing that we need to become like our Heavenly Father.
Exactly in the middle of this chapter, Lehi kind of explains why this principle, this doctrine, this eternal doctrine of agency is important. Lehi says, and now, my sons, I speak unto you these things for your profit and learning. That's why we study. That's why we dig into the scriptures, because there is a path that Christ has shown the example of that leads to happiness, that leads to fulfillment, that leads to progression and becoming like God. And so knowing these things is for our profit and our learning. Us sitting here today and teaching and talking is for all of our profit and our learning.
Probably mostly for ours.
Yeah, it's a good point. But no, agency, it is a gift, and treat it as such. And it's an eternal gift.